The scent of burnt sage and lavender hung heavy in the air, mingling with the unmistakable musk of alphas that made my stomach clench with anxiety. The great hall of selections was adorned with crimson tapestries depicting ancient mating ceremonies, their golden threads catching the light from hundreds of candles that cast long, dancing shadows across the marble floor. Outside, rain lashed against stained glass windows, the storm punctuating the tension that filled the room like a physical presence. I stood at the back of the line of Omegas, each of us dressed in ceremonial white silk that whispered against my skin with every trembling breath I took. Unlike the others, whose gowns hugged curves and accentuated delicate features, mine hung loosely from my angular shoulders, a testament to my status among them. The runt, the oddity, the Omega who never quite fit. "Remember what I told you, Elawan," my grandmother had whispered just hours before, pressing her weathered wooden pendant into my palm. The carved wolf's head was smooth from generations of anxious fingers, my own included. "Your worth isn't measured by their standards. It's found in the quiet strength they're too blind to see." I clutched the pendant now, feeling its familiar contours dig into my flesh as I watched the other Omegas ahead of me. 23 in total, each more beautiful and graceful than the last, each desperate to catch the eye of the Alpha King. Their laughter tinkled like bells, their movements rehearsed to perfection as they preened and positioned themselves strategically within the great hall. "I can't believe they even let her participate," whispered Thea, her golden hair cascading down her back in perfect waves. "What alpha would ever choose someone who can barely produce a scent?" Her companion, Lyra, snickered behind a perfectly manicured hand. "Maybe they needed someone to make the rest of us look better by comparison." My cheeks burned, but I kept my gaze fixed on the pendant, running my thumb over the wolf's carved eye. I had heard worse throughout my 22 years. Being an Omega with a weak scent gland was considered a genetic failure, a cosmic joke that made me nearly invisible in a society where matching pheromones determined destiny. The massive doors at the far end of the hall swung open, silencing all conversation instantly. The Council of Elders entered first, their silver robes shimmering in the candlelight, followed by lower-ranking alphas, who would also be selecting mates tonight. But all eyes, including mine, were drawn to the figure who entered last, Alpha King, Raymond Blackthorn. The air around me suddenly felt too thick to breathe. He moved with the lethal grace of a predator, his broad shoulders and towering height making even the strongest alphas in the room subtly bow their heads in deference. His face was all sharp angles and shadow, with eyes so intensely blue they seemed to cut through the dim light like ice. A jagged scar ran from his right temple to his jaw, a reminder of the challenge that had won him the throne 3 years ago. Unlike the other alphas, dressed in ceremonial finery, Raymond wore simple black clothing that emphasized his warrior's build. No ornaments adorned him except for the silver crown that sat upon his raven hair and the royal signet ring that marked him as ruler of the 7 territories. "Let the ceremony of selection begin," announced Elder Thorn, her voice echoing through the hall. "May the moon goddess guide each alpha to their destined mate." One by one, the Omegas were presented to the gathering of alphas. Some were immediately approached, scented and claimed. Others underwent the humiliation of being passed over after alphas found their scents incompatible. I watched it all from my position at the end of the line, heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Through it all, Alpha King Raymond remained apart, his piercing gaze evaluating each Omega with detached interest before dismissing them with the slightest shake of his head. The whispers grew as Omega after Omega failed to capture his attention. It's said he's never found a compatible mate. They say his rut cycles are so intense that no Omega could survive being claimed by him. I heard the last Omega who tried to approach him uninvited was banished from the territories. By the time my turn arrived, only 3 Omegas remained unclaimed, standing off to the side with barely concealed disappointment etched on their beautiful faces. Elder Thorn beckoned me forward, her expression a mixture of pity and resignation. "Elowen Nightshade," she announced, her voice notably quieter than it had been for the others. "Omega, daughter of the late Beta Marek Nightshade of the Eastern Forest Pack." I stepped forward on legs that threatened to buckle beneath me. The silk of my ceremonial gown felt suddenly abrasive against my hypersensitive skin. The pendant clutched in my hand seemed to burn with an inner heat, my grandmother's words echoing in my mind. When all seems lost, remember that true strength often lies in what others perceive as weakness. A ripple of murmurs and poorly concealed laughter spread through the hall as I took my place in the center of the ceremonial circle. Unlike the other Omegas, whose scents had filled the space around them like exotic perfumes, my presence barely registered. The Alphas looked through me rather than at me, their expressions ranging from indifference to faint disgust. "This one's defective," said a burly Alpha from the northern mountains, not bothering to lower his voice. "Can barely smell anything from her at all." "What use is an Omega who can't even produce a proper mating scent?" another called out, triggering a wave of cruel laughter. My face burned with humiliation, but I forced myself to stand tall. Grandmother's pendant clutched so tightly now that its edges cut into my palm. Blood trickled between my fingers, its coppery scent suddenly sharp in the air around me. And that's when I felt it. A shift in the atmosphere, subtle yet unmistakable. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end as an overwhelming presence focused on me with predatory intensity. I raised my eyes slowly, following the sudden silence that had fallen over the hall, to find Alpha King Raymond staring directly at me. His nostrils flared slightly, and something dangerous flashed in those ice-blue eyes, something that made every instinct in my body scream to run. Instead, I did the unthinkable. I held his gaze. No Omega had dared to make direct eye contact with the Alpha King throughout the entire ceremony. It was considered both disrespectful and challenging, a violation of the most basic pack protocols. Yet something in me refused to look away, refused to bow to the weight of tradition that had declared me worthless before I'd even had a chance to speak. The pendant in my hand pulsed once, warm and reassuring, as blood continued to seep between my fingers. The droplets hit the ceremonial circle, sizzling against the ancient runes carved into the stone floor. The candlelight flickered wildly, though no breeze stirred the air. "Impossible," Elder Thorn whispered, her eyes wide with disbelief. The Alpha King moved then, crossing the distance between us with predatory grace that made every person in the hall shrink back. He circled me slowly, his gaze never leaving mine, nostrils flaring as he breathed in what little scent I possessed. When he came to stand before me again, his expression was unreadable. "Your blood," he said, his voice deep and resonant in a way that seemed to vibrate through my very bones. "Show me your hand." Trembling, I uncurled my fingers, revealing my grandmother's pendant and the small pool of blood that had collected in my palm. The carved wolf's eyes seemed to glow with an inner light, or perhaps it was merely a trick of the candlelight, reflecting off the crimson liquid. Raymond's eyes narrowed, and without warning, he reached out and took my bloodied hand in his much larger one. A collective gasp echoed through the hall. No Alpha had ever touched an Omega so directly during the ceremony, without first declaring intent to claim. The moment his skin touched mine, something electric shot through me, a current so powerful it nearly brought me to my knees. From his sharp intake of breath, I knew he felt it too. His pupils dilated until only a thin ring of blue remained, and a low, rumbling growl built in his chest, a sound that sent shivers down my spine and made every Omega in the room instinctively back away. "Leave us," he commanded, his gaze still locked with mine. "All of you." No one dared question the Alpha King. The hall emptied within moments, leaving me alone with the most dangerous predator in all 7 territories, his hand still wrapped around mine, my blood marking us both. "You should have been wearing gloves," he said quietly once we were alone. "The ceremonial circle is infused with ancient magic. Blood offerings haven't been part of the selection in over 3 centuries. I didn't know," I whispered, finding my voice at last. It sounded small in the vast emptiness of the hall. His thumb traced the line of my palm, smearing the blood in a pattern that made the pendant grow warmer against my skin. "No, I don't suppose you did. The old ways aren't taught anymore." His eyes lifted to mine again, calculating. "Do you know what you've done, little Omega?" I shook my head, unable to form words under the intensity of his stare. "You've invoked the primal selection, a challenge to fate itself." His lips curved into something too sharp to be called a smile. "And now I have no choice but to claim you as mine." "Claim me?" The words escaped my lips before I could stop them, barely more than a breath in the cavernous silence of the great hall. But I don't understand. I'm defective, weak, unworthy. Ramon's voice cut through my protests like a blade, his eyes never leaving mine. Is that what you were going to say, little Omega? Heat rushed to my cheeks. Those were exactly the words that had followed me throughout my life, whispered behind hands and sometimes shouted to my face. Words that had carved themselves into my identity until I'd almost believed them. What I am, I said carefully, surprising myself with the steadiness in my voice, is confused. You could have any Omega in the territories, ones with proper sense, from powerful families, with... I gestured vaguely at my own body, with everything I lack. The Alpha King released my hand suddenly and stepped back, creating distance between us that somehow felt more intimate than his touch had been. He circled me again, his movements reminiscent of a predator assessing prey, yet something in his gaze spoke of curiosity rather than hunger. "What's your name again?" he asked, though I was certain he remembered. "Alawan," I answered. "Alawan Nightshade." "Nightshade," he repeated, the word rolling off his tongue like he was tasting it. "Your father was Beta Merrick Nightshade? The strategist who died in the border wars?" I nodded, swallowing the familiar lump that formed in my throat at the mention of my father. Yes. 10 years ago. I remember him. He saved my father's life, though it cost him his own. Raymond's expression softened almost imperceptibly. He was a man of unusual perception. It seems his daughter shares that quality. Before I could respond, he gestured to the pendant still clutched in my bloodied hand. "That symbol. Do you know what it means?" I looked down at the carved wolf's head, its features worn smooth by generations of anxious fingers. It was my grandmother's. She said it would protect me when I needed it most. A sound that might have been a laugh escaped him, though there was no humor in it. "Your grandmother, Sybil Nightshade, the hedge witch who lived on the borders of the eastern forest." Surprise must have shown on my face because this time he did laugh, a sound so unexpected it sent a shiver down my spine. "You think I don't know every member of every pack in my territories, little Omega, especially those with unique talents?" He reached out and gently took the pendant from my hand, examining it in the candlelight. "This is no ordinary talisman. It bears the mark of the old magic, the kind that predates our current pack structures. The kind that recognizes true mates, not by convenience or political alliance, but by soul compatibility." Thunder crashed outside, and for a moment, the stained glass windows illuminated with lightning, casting prismatic patterns across Raymond's severe features. In that flash of otherworldly light, I glimpsed something beneath his controlled exterior. A profound loneliness that mirrored the hollow space I'd carried within my chest for as long as I could remember. "The blood selection you unwittingly performed," he continued, returning the pendant to me, "overrides all other considerations in our laws. It reveals what our modern scent matching cannot, the true bond that transcends physical compatibility." My mind raced to process his words. "Are you saying that we're true mates?" he finished, the words hanging between us like a physical presence. "Yes, though it complicates matters considerably." "How?" I asked, suddenly aware of how completely my life had transformed in the span of mere minutes. Raymond's expression darkened. "The council won't accept it easily. They've been pressuring me to choose a politically advantageous mate, preferably from one of the border packs to strengthen our alliances against the southern threats." He ran a hand through his raven hair, dislodging the simple silver crown slightly. It was the first unguarded gesture I'd seen from him. "And you're from a diminished bloodline with no political power. Worse, your condition makes you appear weak in their eyes." "My condition has a name," I said, a flicker of defiance igniting within me. "Scent diminishment syndrome. It doesn't make me weak. It just makes me different." The corner of his mouth twitched. "Precisely. But the council sees only in terms of strength and weakness as they define it. They won't understand what happened here tonight. They'll claim trickery or manipulation." "Then reject me," I said simply, though the words caused a strange ache in my chest. "Claim it was a mistake. Choose someone suitable." "Impossible," Raymond replied, and there was something almost tender in his voice. The old magic doesn't permit such deception. Once recognized, a true mate bond cannot be denied without consequences. What kind of consequences? The painful kind, he said grimly. For both parties. I stared at him, this towering alpha who ruled 7 territories with an iron fist, wondering how destiny could have possibly decided we belonged together. He must have read the doubt in my expression, because he stepped closer, his presence engulfing my senses. You don't believe me, he stated. It's not that I don't believe you, I said carefully. It's that I don't understand why. Why me? I've spent my entire life being overlooked, being told I'm less than other Omegas, and now suddenly the most powerful alpha in the territories is claiming we're destined mates? It doesn't make sense. Perhaps that's exactly why, he murmured, reaching out to brush a strand of hair from my face. His touch was surprisingly gentle for hands that had won countless dominance battles. You see, Elowen Nightshade, I too know what it is to be different, to be feared rather than understood. For the first time, I really looked at him, not as the Alpha King, but as a man. The scar that ran down his face wasn't his only one. Faint white lines crisscrossed his exposed forearms, telling stories of battles fought and won. But there was something else, something in the way he held himself slightly apart, as though accustomed to isolation even in a crowded room. You're lonely, I whispered, the realization striking me with unexpected force. Something flashed in his eyes, vulnerability quickly masked by practiced indifference. We're all lonely in our own ways. The doors to the great hall suddenly burst open, ending our moment of connection. Elder Thorn entered, followed by the rest of the council, their faces set in expressions ranging from confusion to barely concealed outrage. Your Majesty, Elder Thorn began, her voice carefully modulated, the selection ceremony is not complete. There are protocols to be observed, announcements to be made. If you've made your choice, I have, Raymond interrupted, his demeanor instantly transforming back into the imposing Alpha King. The change was so abrupt, it was as though a mask had slipped into place. And I will make my announcement at the claiming feast as tradition dictates. Elder Thorn's gaze flicked to me, dismissive and calculating at once. Surely you don't intend to... What I intend, Raymond cut in, his voice dropping to a dangerous rumble that made every elder take an instinctive step back, is to follow the oldest laws of our kind. The blood has spoken. The choice is made. The blood? Elder Voss, the oldest member of the council, stepped forward, his rheumy eyes fixed on my still bloodied hand. You don't mean... The primal selection? That hasn't been invoked in centuries. Not intentionally, no, Raymond agreed, but invoked it was, nonetheless. Murmurs rippled through the gathered elders. Elder Thorn's face had gone pale beneath her ceremonial paint. This Omega is unsuitable, she hissed, abandoning all pretense of respect. She's weak, her bloodline diminished, her scent nearly non-existent, the alpha air she might produce. Enough! Raymond's roar shook the very foundations of the hall, making the candle flames dance wildly. You forget yourself, Elder. The law is clear. The old magic has chosen, and I have accepted. Elowen Nightshade will be my queen. The silence that followed was absolute. I stood frozen, unable to process the magnitude of what he'd just declared. Me? Queen? The very idea was absurd, terrifying, impossible. Elder Thorn recovered first, her eyes narrowing as she studied me with renewed interest. Very well, Your Majesty. As you wish. Her voice dripped with false deference. We shall prepare for the claiming feast. But perhaps you should allow us to prepare your chosen Omega as well. She is clearly unfamiliar with royal protocols. Something cold slithered down my spine at her words. There was a threat buried within them, subtle but unmistakable. Raymond must have sensed it too, because he moved slightly, positioning himself between me and the council. My chosen will prepare in the royal wing, under my personal protection. That's highly irregular, protested Elder Voss. Tradition dictates. I know what tradition dictates, Raymond said coldly. I also know that traditions can be manipulated by those with agendas. His gaze swept across the council members, each of whom suddenly found the floor tremendously interesting. The feast will begin in 3 hours. Until then, Elowen Nightshade is under my protection. Anyone who approaches her without my explicit permission will answer directly to me. With that, he turned and held out his hand to me, aware of every eye in the room, watching, judging, calculating. I placed my smaller hand in his. The contact sent another jolt of that strange electricity through my body, and from the slight widening of his eyes, I knew he felt it too. "Come," he said, his voice softening just enough for me to hear the difference. "There's much to discuss before tonight." As he led me from the great hall, I could feel the weight of the council's collective gaze burning into my back. I didn't need enhanced senses to know what they were thinking, that I was a mistake, an obstacle, a problem to be solved. I had inadvertently disrupted years of careful political maneuvering with one drop of blood, and there would be consequences. But as Raymond's hand tightened reassuringly around mine, I found myself standing straighter, drawing strength from this unexpected connection that had upended both our lives in the space of an hour. "They hate me," I whispered, as we entered a corridor I'd never seen before, away from prying eyes and ears. "They fear change," he corrected, his thumb absently stroking the inside of my wrist, where my pulse raced beneath his touch. "And they should, because everything is about to change, little Omega. Everything." The royal wing was nothing like I had imagined. Instead of the opulent displays of wealth I expected, Raymond's private quarters were surprisingly austere. Massive stone walls lined with ancient weapons and maps rather than tapestries, furniture built for function rather than beauty, floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a commanding view of the storm-lashed mountains surrounding the keep. It was the domain of a warrior, not a king who reveled in luxury. "It's not what you expected," Raymond said, watching my reaction as a servant hurriedly lit the fire in the massive stone hearth before disappearing with a bow. "No," I admitted, drawn to the warmth of the flames. My ceremonial gown, still damp from the rain that had blown in through the great hall's open doors, clung uncomfortably to my skin. "But it suits you." He moved to a heavy oak cabinet and withdrew 2 goblets and a decanter filled with amber liquid. "Most find it disappointing. They expect gold and jewels, not this. I prefer honesty to pretense," I said, accepting the goblet he offered. The liquid inside smelled of spices and something deeper, more complex. Even in decor, that almost smile flickered across his face again. "Drink. It will help with the shock." I took a tentative sip and nearly choked as liquid fire burned down my throat. Raymond watched with amusement as I coughed, heat flooding my cheeks. "Alpha's spirits," he explained. "Distilled from mountain herbs, too strong for most Omegas, but I'm not most Omegas," I finished, taking another sip. This time I was prepared for the burn, and beneath it, I tasted notes of wild honey and pine. It spread warmth through my limbs, easing the trembling I hadn't even realized had overtaken me. "No," he agreed, studying me over the rim of his goblet. "You are not." Silence stretched between us, filled only by the crackling of the fire and the distant rumble of thunder. There were 1,000 questions I wanted to ask, but I settled on the most pressing. "What happens now?" Raymond set his goblet down and crossed to a massive desk covered in maps and documents. "Now we prepare for the claiming feast, where I will formally announce you as my chosen mate. After that comes the bonding ceremony, which must take place within 3 days according to ancient law." The casual way he described our future sent a shiver through me that had nothing to do with my damp clothes. "And if I were to refuse?" His head snapped up, those ice-blue eyes locking onto mine with predatory focus. "Do you wish to refuse?" "I don't know what I wish," I answered honestly. 2 hours ago, I was resigned to leaving this ceremony unclaimed, returning to my grandmother's cottage on the edge of the eastern forest, and living out my life as I always have, invisible and inconsequential. Now I'm suddenly expected to become queen to a man I've just met, based on ancient magic I don't understand. I set my goblet down with more force than intended, the sound sharp in the quiet room. "So forgive me, Alpha King, if I need a moment to adjust to the cosmic joke that has become my life." I expected anger at my outburst. What I didn't expect was the low, rumbling laugh that escaped him, a genuine sound of amusement that transformed his severe features into something almost boyish. "You," he said, closing the distance between us with those predator's steps, "are the first person to speak to me with such honesty in years." "I imagine most people are too afraid to tell you the truth," I replied, holding my ground despite the overwhelming urge to step back as he towered over me. "Fear is an effective tool for ruling," he agreed, reaching out to brush his knuckles along my jawline in a touch so light it might have been imagined, but a terrible foundation for a mating bond. His touch lingered, trailing down to the pulse point at my throat. I swallowed hard, my heart racing beneath his fingertips. "Is that what you want? A true bond? Not just a political alliance?" Something vulnerable flashed in his eyes before he masked it. "What I want hasn't mattered for a very long time, little Omega. I've ruled these territories for 3 years. But make no mistake, the crown rules me just as surely as I rule our people." He turned away abruptly, moving to a door I hadn't noticed before. "Come. You need dry clothes before you fall ill, and we have little time before the feast." The door opened to reveal a bathing chamber with a steaming pool cut directly into the stone floor. The scent of herbs and minerals filled the air, surprisingly soothing to my frayed nerves. "I'll have appropriate attire brought for you," Raymond said, maintaining a respectful distance. "There are attendants waiting outside if you require assistance." "I've been dressing myself for 22 years, I replied, a hint of defensiveness creeping into my voice. "I don't need help now." That almost smile again, there and gone in an instant. "As you wish. I have matters to attend to before the feast. Use this time to rest and consider what you want from this arrangement." "Do I have a choice?" I asked, unable to keep the bitterness from my tone. Raymond paused at the door, his broad shoulders tense beneath his simple black clothing. "There are always choices, Elowen. Rarely are they the ones we want." He glanced back, his expression inscrutable. "But for what it's worth, I believe the old magic chooses better than we ever could." With that cryptic statement, he left, the heavy door closing behind him with a sound of finality that echoed in the chamber and in my chest. Left alone, I sank to the edge of the steaming pool, my mind whirling with the impossible events of the day. I pulled my grandmother's pendant from the pocket of my ceremonial gown, studying the blood that had dried in the grooves of the carved wolf's head. "What have you done?" I whispered to it. "What have you gotten me into?" The pendant, of course, didn't answer. But as I turned it in my hands, watching the firelight play across its worn surface, I remembered more of my grandmother's words on the day she'd given it to me. "This has been passed down through our line for generations," she'd said, her gnarled fingers closing mine around it. "It has chosen every true mate in our family since before the packs were formed. It will lead you to yours when the time is right, just as it led me to your grandfather, despite everyone saying a witch should never mate an alpha." I had dismissed her words as the romantic notions of an old woman, never believing the pendant would work for me. After all, how could someone like me, barely an Omega in the eyes of society, hope to find a true mate when even normal Omegas often settled for political or convenient matches? The bathing pool beckoned, and I finally surrendered to its warmth. Slipping out of my damp gown and into the mineral-rich water, the heat seeped into my bones, easing aches I hadn't realized I carried. I ducked beneath the surface, letting the water wash away the remnants of blood from my palm and the tears that had begun to fall without my permission. When I emerged, gasping for air, a young beta female stood by the edge of the pool, her eyes carefully averted. "Forgive the intrusion, my lady," she said, her voice soft and deferential. "I've brought garments for the feast." My instinct was to correct her. I wasn't anyone's lady, but the words died on my lips as I saw what she'd laid out on a nearby bench. Unlike my simple white ceremonial gown, this was a creation of midnight blue silk embroidered with silver thread that caught the light like stars. Beside it lay delicate undergarments, silver slippers, and a small wooden box. "The Alpha King selected these himself," the beta explained, still not meeting my eyes. He said the color would bring out the storm in your eyes." Something warm unfurled in my chest at her words. He had noticed my eyes? I'd always thought them my only remarkable feature, gray with flecks of blue that darkened or lightened with my moods. My grandmother had called them tempest eyes. "Thank you," I said, wrapping myself in the drying cloth the beta offered. "What's your name?" She looked startled by the question, finally meeting my gaze. "Mira, my lady. I serve in the royal wing." "Mira," I repeated, offering her a small smile. "I'm Elowen. Just Elowen, not my lady." Her eyes widened slightly. "But you're to be the queen. Protocol dictates." "Protocol can wait until after I'm dry," I interrupted gently. "For now, I'd rather have a friend than another reminder of how unprepared I am for any of this." Mira's expression softened, and she returned my smile hesitantly. "As you wish, Elowen." She gestured to the wooden box. "Would you like help with the jewels? They're quite intricate." I opened the box to find a set of silver jewelry unlike anything I'd seen before, ancient in design, with symbols similar to those on my grandmother's pendant worked into elaborate patterns. The centerpiece was a delicate circlet meant to rest across the forehead, connected to ear cuffs by fine silver chains. "These look ancient," I murmured, touching the symbols reverently. "They belong to the first queen of the United Territories," Mira explained, her voice dropping to an almost conspiratorial whisper. "They haven't been worn in over a century. The servants are saying it's a sign." "A sign of what?" Mira helped me into the gown before answering, her deft fingers making quick work of the complex fastenings. "That change is coming, that the old ways are returning." She met my eyes in the polished silver mirror as she arranged the circlet on my brow. "Some fear it. Others hope for it." "And you?" I asked, barely recognizing the woman in the mirror. The gown transformed my angular frame, making it look willowy rather than thin. The color indeed brought out the storm in my eyes, making them the focal point of my face. "I lost my parents in the border wars," Mira said simply. "Change can't be worse than what was before." Before I could respond, a sharp knock at the door announced another visitor. Mira hurriedly finished with the jewels and stepped back, her demeanor instantly reverting to servile deference. The door opened to reveal not Raymond, as I had expected, but Elder Thorne. She entered without invitation, her silver robes rustling ominously as she circled me with calculating eyes. "Leave us," she commanded Mira, who bowed and hurried from the room. Once alone, Elder Thorne's mask of civility dropped entirely. "So, the defective Omega thinks to become queen." I lifted my chin, refusing to show the fear coursing through me. "I didn't ask for this." "No," she agreed, her voice silk over steel. "You merely manipulated ancient magic you couldn't possibly understand to trap our king into a disastrous mating." "I did no such thing," I protested, but she waved my words away like irritating insects. "It doesn't matter what you did or didn't do," she said, moving closer until I could smell the cloying scent of decay beneath her ceremonial perfumes. "What matters is what happens next." She reached out suddenly, her bony fingers gripping my chin with surprising strength. "Listen carefully, girl. The Alpha King may believe himself bound to you by old superstitions, but there are ways to break such bonds. Painful ways, yes, but necessary for the good of the territories." "Are you threatening me?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. Her grip tightened painfully. "I'm offering you a choice. Walk away now. Renounce this false claim, and you may return to whatever insignificant life you led before. Stay, and I cannot guarantee your safety or that of what little family you have left." My grandmother's face flashed in my mind, vulnerable in her isolated cottage at the forest's edge. Fear twisted in my gut, but beneath it, something else kindled, a spark of the same defiance that had made me meet Raymond's eyes when every instinct screamed to look away. "Remove your hand," I said quietly, "or I will remove it for you." Elder Thorne's eyes widened in shock, then narrowed with contempt. "You dare threaten an elder of the council?" "No," came a deep voice from the doorway, "but I do." Raymond stood in the doorway, his massive frame nearly filling the space. Gone was the simple black clothing, replaced by formal attire that befitted his station, a midnight blue tunic that matched my gown, embroidered with silver symbols that mirrored those in my jewelry. The silver crown sat upon his raven hair, no longer askew, but perfectly positioned. In that moment, he truly looked like the Alpha King, power radiating from him in almost visible waves. but it was his eyes that held me transfixed, cold blue fire that promised violence. Elder Thorne released me immediately, stepping back with practiced deference that couldn't quite mask her fear. Your Majesty, I was merely acquainting your chosen with the expectations of her new role. Were you? Raymond's voice was deceptively soft as he entered the room. Strange. It looked remarkably like you were threatening the future queen, an act of treason, by any definition. The color drained from Elder Thorne's face. A misunderstanding, surely. I was merely explaining the challenges she might face. I understand perfectly, I said, finding my voice at last. Elder Thorne believes I've manipulated you through ancient magic. She was explaining how I should renounce my claim and disappear for the good of the territories and for the safety of my grandmother. Something dangerous flashed across Raymond's features. There and gone so quickly I might have imagined it if not for the sudden spike of tension in the room. The air grew heavy, charged with the unmistakable presence of an alpha's rage barely contained. Is that so? He asked, each word precisely enunciated as he stepped closer to Elder Thorne, who visibly shrank before him. And what gave you the impression, Elder, that you had the authority to make such suggestions to my chosen mate? I only sought to protect you, Your Majesty, she stammered, her earlier confidence evaporating like morning mist. This Omega is unsuitable. Her condition, her name, Raymond interrupted, is Elowen Nightshade, and she will be addressed as such, or as Your Highness. Nothing less. He turned to me then, his gaze softening almost imperceptibly. Are you harmed? I touched my chin where her fingers had dug in, certain there would be bruises by morning. Nothing lasting. Something passed between us in that moment. Understanding, perhaps, or the beginning of trust. Raymond nodded once before returning his attention to Elder Thorne. Consider your position on the council terminated. Effective immediately, he said coldly. You will attend the feast to witness my formal announcement, and then you will return to your ancestral lands. If I ever hear that you have approached, contacted, or so much as mentioned Elowen or any member of her family again, your punishment will be far more severe than mere exile. Elder Thorne's face contorted with barely suppressed rage. You cannot dismiss me. I have served the council for 30 years. The other elders will never— The other elders, Raymond cut in, serve at my pleasure, not the other way around, a fact they would do well to remember. He gestured toward the door. Now leave, before I forget the laws of hospitality that prevent me from exacting more immediate justice for your threats against my mate. For a moment, I thought Elder Thorne might defy him. Her hands trembled at her sides, and hatred radiated from her in palpable waves. But self-preservation won out. With a stiff bow that contained no deference, she backed toward the door. You will regret this, she said, her gaze fixed on me rather than Raymond. Both of you. Then she was gone, the door closing behind her with ominous finality. The silence that followed stretched between us, filled with unspoken questions and the lingering tension of confrontation. Raymond moved to the window, staring out at the storm that still raged across the mountains. I should have anticipated this, he said finally, his voice laced with self-recrimination. I've known for years that Thorne harbored ambitions beyond her station. She has a niece, a politically connected Omega, whom she'd hoped I would choose today. She won't stop, I said quietly, moving to stand beside him at the window. This was only her opening move. He glanced down at me, surprise evident in his expression. Most would be terrified after such a confrontation. Oh, I'm terrified, I admitted, a shaky laugh escaping me. But fear has been my companion for most of my life. At least now I know where the threat comes from, rather than jumping at shadows. Raymond studied me with new interest, as though seeing something he hadn't noticed before. Your father was the same, afraid, but never paralyzed by it. He used fear as a tool rather than allowing it to use him. You knew him well? I asked, hungry for any memory of the father I'd lost too young. Not as well as I would have liked, Raymond admitted. I was barely 17 when he died saving my father in battle, but I remember him as a man who saw what others missed. Patterns, weaknesses, opportunities. It made him an unparalleled strategist. His gaze grew distant with memory. It also made him dangerous to those who preferred the comfort of tradition over the uncertainty of progress. I absorbed this new piece of my father's legacy, turning it over in my mind like a precious stone. Is that why you believe the old magic chose us? Because we both stand outside tradition? Perhaps. He turned to face me fully, his expression unreadable, or perhaps it recognized something else. A complementary brokenness that makes us stronger together than apart. The vulnerability in his words caught me off guard. Before I could respond, another knock at the door announced the arrival of a servant, who bowed deeply. "Your Majesty, the feast awaits. The guests are assembled." Raymond nodded dismissal to the servant before offering me his arm. "Are you ready?" I wasn't. Not for any of this. But I placed my hand on his arm anyway, drawing strength from the solid warmth of him, as ready as I'll ever be. His hand covered mine, dwarfing it completely. "Stay close to me tonight. The council may have other agents besides Thorn. Trust no one until we know who stands with us and who against us." We walked in silence through the twisting corridors of the keep, the sounds of the gathering growing louder as we approached the great feast hall. Guards lined our path, their expressions carefully neutral as they bowed to their king and his unexpected choice. At the massive doors to the hall, Raymond paused, looking down at me with an intensity that stole my breath. "Once we enter, there's no turning back. The announcement will make our match official in the eyes of pack law, and if I wish to turn back," I asked, needing to hear the answer, even though I already knew what my choice would be. "Then I would escort you to the Eastern Forest myself," he said without hesitation, "and spend the rest of my days in agony for the bond denied." The simple honesty of his words settled something within me. I reached up, brushing my fingers against the scar that marked his face, my first time initiating contact between us. "Then we go forward, together." Something fierce and possessive flashed in his eyes. For a moment, I thought he might kiss me, and an answering heat bloomed low in my belly at the thought, but he merely nodded, squeezing my hand once before signaling the guards to open the doors. The great feast hall fell silent as we entered, hundreds of eyes turning to stare at the Alpha King and the unlikely Omega on his arm. The hall was a wonder of ancient architecture, with soaring stone arches and massive fireplaces that kept the mountain chill at bay. Long tables filled the space, laden with food and drink for the hundreds of guests, alphas, betas, and the Omegas who had participated in the selection ceremony. I spotted Thea and Lyra among them, their beautiful faces frozen in expressions of shock and outrage as they took in my transformation. Beside them sat other unclaimed Omegas, some looking relieved at their escape, others bitter at what they perceived as my undeserved elevation. At the high table sat the remaining council elders, with Elder Thorn conspicuously absent from her usual place of honor. Their expressions ranged from diplomatic neutrality to barely concealed hostility as they watched our approach. Whispers followed us like ripples in a pond. "How did she enchant him? They say she used blood magic." "The defective Omega. It won't last a month. The council will never accept her." I kept my gaze forward, grandmother's pendant a reassuring weight against my skin beneath the beautiful gown. Raymond's arm was steady under my hand, his presence an anchor in the storm of speculation that surrounded us. When we reached the high table, Raymond didn't take his seat immediately. Instead, he turned to face the assembled guests, keeping me at his side, rather than relegating me to the secondary position tradition dictated for an unmated chosen. "Tonight," he began, his voice carrying effortlessly to every corner of the vast hall, "marks a return to the old ways, to the wisdom that guided our ancestors before politics and convenience began to dictate our mating practices." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, but fell silent as he continued. "Today, the old magic spoke through blood and bone, recognizing what our modern ceremonies cannot. The true bond that transcends physical compatibility and political advantage." He turned to me then, taking both my hands in his before the assembled crowd, an unprecedented display of affection from the notoriously reserved Alpha King. "I present to you Elowen Nightshade, daughter of Beta Marak Nightshade of the Eastern Forest Pack. The old magic has named her my true mate, and I have accepted this sacred bond." Gasps and whispers erupted throughout the hall. Elder Voss rose shakily to his feet, his ancient voice quavering with barely contained outrage. "Your Majesty, this is highly irregular. The Council must convene to discuss the implications of— The Council's approval is not required for a true mate bond recognized by the old magic," Raymond interrupted, his tone brooking no argument. "The laws are clear on this matter, Elder Voss, as you well know. But her condition," another elder began, "is irrelevant," Raymond finished firmly. "The primal selection has been invoked and accepted. 3 days hence, Elowyn Nightshade will become my queen, and the Luna of all 7 territories." The declaration hung in the air like a physical presence. I felt the weight of hundreds of stares, some curious, others hostile, many simply stunned by the unprecedented nature of the announcement. In that moment of charged silence, I felt something shift within me, a quiet determination replacing the fear that had been my constant companion. I stepped forward, still holding Raymond's hand, and addressed the gathered crowd directly. "I know I am not what any of you expected," I said, my voice steady, despite the rapid beating of my heart. "I am not from a powerful family. I do not possess the qualities traditionally valued in an Omega. I stand before you as surprised by the old magic's choice as you are." I paused, drawing strength from the slight pressure of Raymond's hand around mine. But perhaps that is precisely why I was chosen. For too long, we have measured worth by narrow standards, by sense strength, by political connections, by adherence to traditions that may no longer serve us. The old magic sees beyond such limitations, to the heart of what binds souls together. I touched my grandmother's pendant through the fabric of my gown. "I cannot promise I will be the queen you expected, but I can promise I will be the queen you need. One who sees those who have been overlooked, who values substance over appearance, who believes that true strength often lies in what others perceive as weakness." A profound silence followed my words. Then, from the back of the hall, a single figure rose, a beta woman with the weathered face of a warrior. She placed her fist over her heart in the traditional salute of the Eastern Forest Pack. "Daughter of Marok," she called, her voice thick with emotion. "Your father saved my life in the border wars. His blood runs in your veins. That is strength enough for me." One by one, others from the Eastern Forest Pack rose to join her salute. Then members of other packs began to stand as well. Not all, but enough to send a clear message to the council elders who remained seated, their faces rigid with displeasure. Raymond's hand tightened around mine, and when I looked up at him, I saw something I never expected to see in the eyes of the fearsome Alpha King. Pride, not possessive pride in claiming a mate, but something deeper, more profound. "Pride in me. The feast begins," he announced, guiding me to the seat beside his own, the queen's seat that had remained empty since his ascension to the throne. As I sat, he leaned close, his lips brushing my ear in a gesture that sent shivers down my spine. "You continue to surprise me, little Omega," he murmured. "Perhaps the old magic is wiser than all of us." As the feast commenced around us, with music and conversation gradually replacing the tension of moments before, I felt the pendant warm against my skin. A gentle reminder of my grandmother's words that now seemed prophetic rather than fanciful. Your worth isn't measured by their standards. It's found in the quiet strength they're too blind to see. For the first time in my life, I began to believe it might be true. The path ahead would not be easy. Elder Thorn's threats and the council's resistance made that clear. But as I sat beside Raymond, watching him command the respect of those around us, while his hand occasionally sought mine beneath the table, I felt something unfamiliar bloom in my chest. Hope. Not just for myself, but for all those who had ever been deemed defective, weak, or unworthy by a society too narrow in its vision to see beyond its own rigid expectations. If an Omega with scent diminishment syndrome could become queen through the wisdom of ancient magic, what other possibilities might exist for those who had been cast aside? As though reading my thoughts, Raymond leaned close again, his voice for my ears alone. "This is just the beginning, Elowyn," he promised, his ice-blue eyes alight with something that looked remarkably like affection. "Together, we will rewrite the very meaning of strength in these territories." And in that moment, surrounded by uncertainty and danger, yet anchored by this unexpected connection that defied all convention, I knew my grandmother's pendant had led me exactly where I needed to be. Not to safety or security or even love, though perhaps that would come in time, but to purpose. To the place where my perceived weakness could become the catalyst for change that had been centuries in the making. I smiled up at my Alpha King, my future mate, and felt the last of my doubts fall away. Together, I agreed, lacing my fingers through his beneath the table. Let them underestimate us at their peril.